Coming up next on Words and Numbers, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly.
A late Christmas story.
White/Nazi dating sites.
And what's wrong with the economy?
All this and more coming up next on Words and Numbers, a Civil original production. Check us out at civil.com. That's civl.com.
Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Anthony.
And this is Words and Numbers.
Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I want to start by apologizing to our listeners for a first in Words and Numbers.
A very first.
We missed a episode 2 days ago. First time in 7-8 years.
I want to point out that we have gotten our episodes in even when one or both of us were hospitalized.
Right. Hospitalized through COVID. I was traveling several times. You were traveling. Yeah. Despite that, you had back surgery, in fact, during one of them. We got it in nonetheless. Well,
and we still couldn't get it done yesterday.
What was finally our downfall was a cascade of technical problems between my mic not working, James' camera not working, the platform not working, and on top of everything else, we had one of our listeners, David Green, who spent 30 years in the health insurance industry, came on to join us. Oh, yes, his dog also, that was part of the thing. And we had a very nice conversation about the state of healthcare, and the entire episode was just, it was lost. Apart from all the problems, the thing didn't download. But we're going to have David back. He's thankfully, not only is he still a listener, but he's agreed to come back. So we will have that episode in the future.
And I have to say, it was a pretty illuminating conversation. I learned things that I had no idea about some of the things he told us. So looking forward to having him back.
Well, we started that conversation with David saying that we never talk about health care, health insurance, because we don't know anything about it. And apparently the universe didn't like our change of plans.
That's right. But we do now know more about it.
I had something I wanted to show.
Oh, God, you're going to show this thing to the people?
I was going to show it, and I can't find it. My wife probably took it.
Yeah, I bet that's right.
That's what I get in the mail a couple of days ago, a package from one of our listeners, Jordan Woodhams. Jordan is the president of the West Australia Libertarian, I don't know what the word is, Society Group Party, West Australian Libertarian Party. And James and I had, he goes by Woody. Woody was very nice to have us on. And we gave a lecture in what was the middle of the day for them, but it was like 2:00 in the morning for us. And Woody sends this signed calendar. Go ahead and show it. You'll know why my wife ran off with it.
Here's Woody.
Beefcake
right here.
Firefighters.
Woody is Mr. Perth Firefighter 2026 for February. And this is easily the weirdest gift I have ever gotten. And while I often say, Ant, that there's no such thing as a gift I don't want, I don't know about this one, man. I don't know. Anyway, Woody, thanks.
Thank you.
Don't know what to do with this, but here we are.
My opening story for this week is a belated Christmas story. I ran across this about a week ago, and it was so good I wanted to share it, and we're still kind of in the Christmas season now. By the way, James used to make fun of me about this. He will again when I remind him. In the official Christian calendar, there are 12 days of Christmas, you know from the song, The 12 Days of Christmas. The 12 days begin on Christmas Day and then go for the season of 12. And in the United States, of course, we've developed this habit of starting Christmas like the day after Halloween and then ending it on the 26th. So nonetheless, we're still kind of close to around the Christmas season. So I have a Christmas story. One Christmas, Rob Parsons and his wife, Diane, were having dinner in their home in Cardiff, England. There's a knock at the door. On the Parsons' doorstep stood Ronnie Lockwood, age 30, a homeless autistic man. In his right hand Ronnie held a large bag containing all his possessions. In his left, a frozen chicken. And Rob Parsons said something that would change all three of their lives forever. Rob said, "Come in. What's with the chicken?" Rob and Diane Parsons, age 27, 26 at the time, offered Ronnie a place to shower, invited him to stay for Christmas. To make him feel welcome, they asked relatives to bring Ronnie Christmas gifts. Diane says, quote, "I can remember him now. He sat at the Christmas table with his presents and cried. He said he'd never known that feeling of love." The Parsons' compassion for Ronnie would last far longer than the Christmas holidays. Ronnie became a member of their family, living with the Parsons until his death 45 years later. During his years with the Parsons, Ronnie would help around the house and with the kids. Rob said that their kids had never known life without Ronnie. Ronnie was there before they came, and he was there after they were gone with children of their own. The Parsons helped him to get a job as a garbage collector. Rob Parson, who was a lawyer, would drop Ronnie at work on the way to his law firm. One day on the way to work, Ronnie is smiling, and Rob asks, "What's amusing you so much?" Ronnie replied, "When you drop me off, the other men say, 'Who is that who brings you to work?' And I say, 'Oh, that's my solicitor.'" Over the years, Ronnie saved his pennies. When he died, he left £40,000 to Glenwood Church in Cardiff, which is now home to a new wellness center named Lockwood House in Ronnie's honor.
That's actually such a nice story. I can't make fun of you for it.
Isn't that a great story? That's wonderful.
I have to break with tradition here, because usually at this point, I'm calling you a name of some kind and we're moving on to a far more interesting story. I'm not going to call you a name, but we're going to move on to a far more interesting story nonetheless. You might remember, Ant, when my senator in Arizona, one of my two, Mark Kelly, former military figure, former astronaut, really pretty accomplished guy, got himself into Dutch with the current administration when he said something along the lines of, in a video message to active troops, that you don't have to follow illegal orders.
Right.
Remember that? Now, one might think that saying you don't have to do an illegal thing wouldn't get anybody in trouble unless you're working for the mob. But here comes Secretary of War Pete Hegseth saying that they're going to cut Mark Kelly's retirement pay over a seditious video. So now, I just want you to think this through. It's apparently sedition to tell people that they don't have to break the law.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how we got here, but I did a little digging. Not a lot, but a little. And I learned some fascinating things. When an officer, and this is true of each branch of the military, this is the oath. I'm going to read you the oath that officers take. Officers, I state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Do you notice a word that's not in there? President.
Yeah, I guess so. Right, because yes, I love that. The duty is to the Constitution.
Now, let me move on, because the oath of for an enlisted man is different. Enlisted. I state your name, do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the officers appointed over me, according to regulations and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God. So officers are, in a sense, exempt from orders issued from the president. Orders come from the president to the officers to the enlisted, and the officers are charged with deciding whether those are true and legal orders. Isn't that fascinating? Right. So I don't know what the hell is going to happen with Mark Kelly. I really don't. I suspect Mark Kelly doesn't need the pension. So, I suspect it's all for show at this point. But I thought it would be interesting for people to hear those two oaths of office and understand that they are fundamentally different and that officers occupy a very special place in the constitutional republic. Officers are also at least annually given ethics training, whereby the difference between legal and illegal orders are covered.
I saw this. I didn't read into it as deeply as you did, but I saw the news about this, and it occurred to me, Mark Kelly's best response should have been a public mea culpa. I'm terribly sorry. I was wrong. The Secretary of War has made it clear that he would like you to follow illegal orders.
I would have done exactly that. But this one's going to play out a little bit because it strikes to the heart of the constitutional regime in a way that a lot of things that we gripe about don't. So
Yep.
I'm going to keep an eye on it, see what happens, and we'll get back to it if anything does.
We're happy to announce that Civil members can join me and James for a new lecture series, Words and Numbers Live. Words and Numbers Live is a members-only series in which James and I talk about issues in politics, philosophy, and economics. We take a deeper dive and then invite listeners for a live Q&A session. You can also submit your questions for us at wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com. To participate in this exclusive series, subscribe to Civil at civil.com. That's civl.com. When you log in to civil.com, you'll find an archive of our past lecture series, as well as the collection of all our episodes of Words and Numbers and announcements about upcoming lectures in our new Words and Numbers Live series. Subscribe to Civil for $5 a month or $50 for an annual subscription.
This brings us to the foolishness of the week. And Ant, we've got a humdinger this time. There is a... You know at this point, of course, that there are hacker conferences where all the nerds get together and make a mess of things.
Oh, yeah, they've been around for a long time.
For a long time. Well, there is a hacker who goes by the name Martha Root and wears the pink Power Ranger outfit when she becomes Martha Root. I don't know what that means, but okay. Anyway, she took the stage at the annual Chaos Communication Congress in Hamburg, Germany, and took down 3 what she called Nazi dating sites. I think they were all 3 dedicated. They were called, and I'll let you decide whether they're Nazis or not. That's not a word I throw around lightly. But in her defense, the 3 companies were called White Date, White Child, and White Deal.
Yep.
So we might have Nazi dating websites. Anyway, she said they were so easy to take down that it was embarrassing. And she made all of the metadata public. So now people can go look up all of the people who had accounts on these websites.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And I can't imagine this is going to end well. The White Child one in the middle, not exactly a dating website. That was a sperm and egg donor website so people could make sure they got little Aryan babies.
Wow. You know, the internet just lets all sorts of people find each other.
Yeah.
And when there's 8 billion of us, there are a lot of combinations.
You used to say a long time ago that this was a really good thing, but, my village idiot analysis is, I think, going to come to rule the day. I hope one day they call it the Harrigan Village idiot something.
Principle, right.
Yeah, sure, why not? The principle's good as anything else. But boy, every now and then I read a story and it's hilarious on its face, and then I read it for another 3 seconds, and my faith in humanity is dimmed yet another notch.
You know, James, you've said this before, and I think the more I think about it, the more I think there's some serious truth there. So perhaps you might restate your village idiot principle.
Yeah, or the village idiot thesis might be a better moniker. I don't know. It is my firm belief that we have always had village idiots. I know this because I remember them when I was a boy. And the town generally, and the neighbors specifically, made sure that nothing terrible happened to the village idiots, that they had food and that, they got their electricity running and the houses were heated, these sorts of things. And everybody said, well, Johnny, he's not too bright. We got to take care of him. Things like this. And when people talk about community the way you do, this is typically what they're talking about, right? Making sure that people who aren't fully equipped to deal with the vagaries of life get through things without freezing to death in their own living rooms. Things like this. But then the internet came along and we made it so easy to get online that the village idiots were able to do it. And a year or so after that happened, they all started finding each other. And I like to think that AOL message rooms were probably the problem initially. But look, let's face it, you can find people like you everywhere. And for all the reasons that village idiots were protected and nasty people were shunned and things like this, well, now there's no shame in any of it. And they became a political force when they realized there were a lot more of them than maybe any of us realized.
Yeah, they leveled up.
They did level up. And they're having tremendous luck with all the final bosses. And, well, now the political idiots, or the village idiots, are a political force. They're the lowest common denominator, and they have to be pandered to. And they are. Stupidity
It's just wonderful.
And stupidity is much more dangerous than evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
Give me
That's very true, I
malfeasance
think.
over stupidity any day of the week. I can reason with malfeasance.
Well, you could reason with it and it's directed. You can predict it. Stupidity, it's random. Yeah.
Stupidity just drifts around like a formless cloud. But anyway, speaking of formless clouds, we're going to talk today about the American economy yet again. Because this one thing keeps coming up, right? There seems to be a disconnect between the data that's available that you make a living trolling through and the opinions of the American people about the economy they live in. The data says one thing, the people, they say another. And this is actually, I know this is reaching ahead because Donald Trump, I believe it was yesterday, as we record this, was on a conference call with congressional Republicans. And he was saying, look, we're going to have a real problem in the midterms because people think the economy is a mess. But our policies are all doing wonders and the economy is not a mess. And he wants to know why all these people keep saying that there's a problem with the economy when he thinks it's wonderful. Now, let's start by saying, regardless of any of that, the Republicans are historically very likely to take a drubbing in the midterms. On average, the party in power loses 24 seats in the House of Representatives on an off-year election. So that's the average. And the Republicans, I believe right now, with the death of the guy in California yesterday, the day before, have a 5-vote majority. So they're almost assured to be in the minority party. And if they're in the minority party and Hakeem Jeffries becomes Speaker of the House, Donald Trump will be impeached almost immediately.
But what happens in the Senate? Is there any chance of the Senate shifting to Democrat?
I think there is, but it's a real long shot.
Mm-hmm.
So the Constitutional Republic working as designed. The House,
Because
the House mirrors what the people think right now. The Senate takes a much longer view.
that would be interesting, and I mean that simply in a historical sense. Because if the Democrats took both, that would be the end. He would be impeached and removed.
Yes. Well,
Just the way the politics goes.
In all likelihood.
Hmm.
I mean, there are some conservative Democrats out there who might not be willing to do it.
Yeah, and I'm, as interesting as that might be as being a first for the U.S., I'm not sure it's wise. Even I would imagine a lot of people who dislike President Trump would agree with me, given what he has demonstrated.
Right.
I don't think he would leave. I think we'd have a big problem.
Oh, no, he would leave.
You think so?
He would, assuredly so. However, what people don't think through is, would President J.D. Vance be any different or any better if he were different, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Nobody thinks about the unknown unknowns.
Right.
And you see this with our decapitation of the Venezuelan regime. What's going to happen next? Well, apparently nobody stopped to think about that. Okay. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I do know we'll be covering this in next January.
Well,
but for now, let's get to this economy business.
Yeah, the thing is, the president has a point, because I've been scratching my head for a long time about this. It's as if there are two economies out there. When you look at the consumer sentiment numbers, they are so low. I think consumer sentiment right now is at third lowest point since the 1950s, and this is measured monthly. So there's, tons of observations here. This is the third lowest.
Do you have that data at hand?
I don't, but I could pull it up pretty quickly. You want to see something?
I do. I would like to compare right now to, let's say, September of 1979.
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, wait, I've got it. Actually, I do have it right here.
Let's go to September of 1980.
Okay. Let's see here. September of 1980, it was approximately, we're in the high 50s, low 60s area. You said September, right?
Of 1980.
Yes, here it is. 74. This is on roughly a 0 to 100 scale. It does go beyond 100.
With 100 being?
100 is considered, anything above 100, people are happy. They think that tomorrow's going to be better than today, and today is really good. It's positive.
I can tell you that at that time in 1980, people weren't too thrilled with things. They weren't too thrilled with their economic fortunes.
Yeah, September 80, what was happening specifically? I mean, we're in the middle of a huge recession. What was specific about September?
I just wanted to get a few months before the presidential election.
I see. Yeah, well, I'm looking at 1980 in general, and it's minimums. The minimum is March. It's at 57. Generally, most of the year is spent in the mid-60 range.
And this is roughly the time when we had stagflation, right? Double-digit unemployment and double-digit inflation.
Double-digit inflation. People complain about mortgage rates now at, I think they're around 6%. Mortgage rates then were like 20%.
They're like
they're gargantuan. But that's a nice data point to look at. We right now, we're up in December. November was 51.
Wow. So we are at a lower sentiment now than we were then.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah, we are. We're up at 53 now, but that's, we've been in the 50s for a long time.
All right, so let's dig into the data at the individual level, right? What do we know about the median American as he lives in this economy?
Well, let me talk about that in a second. But before we go there, I want to point out something interesting, which is consumer sentiment was, of course it fluctuates, but steadily rising from the housing crisis. So we come out of that roughly 2009. 2009 is rising all the way through 2019, beginning of 2020, and then it tanks. Of course, you expect it to tank because of COVID, but it pretty much never recovers. It's this huge break. Everything after 2020 looks markedly different than what was before. And people are going to say, oh, well, we had Trump, and okay, we had Trump, but we also had Biden. It's not a political thing. It's just Americans. If you look at the fundamentals, economic growth, unemployment, inflation, the economy today looks just like the economy multiple times in the past when we've had ratings of 100 or more. Americans have seen this economy before and loved it. This one they don't.
That's interesting. And look, there's always a psychological impact, right? When you start looking around at the things politicians say and how they behave, right? Do you feel safe and secure is probably a question that should be asked prior to any economic considerations. Mm-hmm. And I think most people right now aren't exactly sure that we're on steady footing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's got to matter, right? I'm not throwing stones here. I'm just saying that by and large, and I've been tracking the opinion polls on President Trump, by and large, people don't trust him.
Yeah. I think that's true. So there's a psychological
38 to 41% approval rating, and that's really, really terrible.
Yeah, but they weren't crazy about Bush the first either. And yet, they liked him, I think, better than they liked Trump. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I think that does play, but I don't think it plays to the tune of consumer sentiment dropping from 100 to 50.
Well, let's get us into the data.
Let's look at.
Look, I can tell you right off the jump that I'm looking at inflation. Right, in 2019 it's 1.8, 2020 it's 1.2, 21 it's up to 4.7, 22 it's up to 8, 23 it's still high at 3.4, 24 it's 2.9, and 3 seems to be the right answer as we move forward, whereas it was always 2. But the thing I always point out when I point out inflation is that prices keep going up, and when the inflation rate drops, prices don't drop. They just escalate less quickly. So we're living in a different world of pricing. We're probably paying 30% more for almost everything.
Well, you've got that. In fact, I've got the CPI numbers in front of me here somewhere. CPI is up over the past roughly 5 to 6 years. 20%.
All right. So if that's true, then we would have to see a corresponding increase in the average wage rate to offset.
Yeah. And we did. Wages are up actually a little bit higher than inflation, so that your median household income is about median real household income, so it's adjusted for inflation, is about 2% higher than it was 2020.
And that's interesting, right? Because you should be able to say, painting with a very broad brush, that, look, things are more expensive, but for the most part, you're making more than the difference back in your salary. So you should actually have more money now than you did 5 years ago.
There are a couple of caveats here. One is, yes, the median household is 2% better off in terms of purchasing power, but that's 2% over 5 years. That's a heck of a long way to go for a measly 2%. So it's not going to feel like you're better off. It's going to feel like you've stagnated for the past 5 years.
Yeah, but that's different from feeling like you're far, far worse off.
It is. This baffles me. And people will say, well, you're talking about the median household. What's probably happened is that the higher income households have done well and the lower income households have done poorly. There's something to be said for that. In fact, so much so that I used to just say it as, well, that's a reasonable explanation, until I yesterday pulled data on household income for the poorest 20% of Americans. And again, this is adjusted for inflation. It's up versus pre-COVID, 2019, 2020. And that, again, leaves you wondering, what are people complaining about? And then I think I saw it, or at least one of what I'm going to propose are several possible explanations here. I pulled the data. When we normally talk about household incomes, we're talking about gross income, income before taxes. I pulled the data on income after taxes and transfers for the poorest 20% of Americans. So this is, you get your paycheck, the government takes some out of it, and the government gives you some money as well. Some people, the poorer you are, the more money you get back, earned income tax credit from various things, but that we call those transfers. And if you look at real household income after transfers, taxes and transfers, it's also up. And again, you ask the question, what's the problem? Until you notice. In 2020, when the government started handing out those stimulus checks were a very large percentage of lower income households' income. And so you see lower income household, income going up, and then all of a sudden skyrockets, like overnight, 20% plus increase in their purchasing power. And it holds there as the government kicks out these checks for however long the government kicked out the checks. And then it tanks. And I suspect that part of the explanation here is that for households, at least for households below the median, they experienced all of a sudden a substantial increase in their incomes, and it held for long enough for them to get used to it. And then it went away. And so they're not feeling that they're down 2, 3, 4%. They're feeling that they're down 20%. Because their baseline is what they were getting during COVID.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suspect there's something else at work here, and you'll have to help parse this out, right? Because a lot of it's going to end up being definitional, what constitutes a household, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Young people are the primary complainers, if I can be so obnoxious as to call them complainers. But it's young people. It's 18 to 34-ish, and they have a batch of different complaints, but they all water down to about the same thing, that they can't get ahead the way previous generations did. Now, I know through anecdotal experience and through the data that I've been able to dig up, that it is more expensive to rent now than it has ever been. But that's almost always true, right? You can almost always say that. It is expensive to rent. It's incredibly expensive to buy a house. If you're renting, it's incredibly difficult to save the 20% you should really save to buy a house. We let people buy houses with 3, 4, 5% now. But when we do, their rates are higher, and rates are already pretty high. And you start to ask questions like, well, how can young people break into middle-class life? And it seems now, and I use the word seems on purpose, it seems now to be more difficult than it once was.
I think you're right. And again, I think you're right at a gut level. But again, I look at the numbers and I'm asking, well, what's going on here? And I went back and calculated the payment you would make on the median priced house at the median mortgage rate. So picture, here's the median house. In fact, I can give you a number. In 2024, it was $420,000. And that same year, the 30-year fixed rate was 6.7%. So do the math, and your monthly payment is $2,300, which is pretty substantial for anybody. Mm-hmm. But here's what's interesting. If you go back over time, and by over time, I mean, I'm looking back to like 1980 through 2020, two things happened. The prices of houses went up, and they kept going up and up and up, but mortgage interest rates were going the other direction.
Right.
And it wasn't until roughly 2022 or so, when we started to get the inflation, that those two things went together. So you've got back up prior to 2022, housing prices going up, which makes things more expensive, but mortgage prices going down, which makes your mortgage rates going down, which makes your final monthly payment basically the same.
And
a little bit more.
One would expect an inverse relationship either way with those two things.
You would kind of expect, because, as interest rates fall, it's cheaper to buy housing. And if I'm looking to sell a house, I'm going to say, well, I'm going to jack up the price because I know you guys can afford it. Right.
But when mortgage rates hit 8% and I need to sell my house, I can't jack it up. I have to lower the price, because on the buyer side, what really matters to the buyer is the monthly payment.
Right. What matters to the buyer is the monthly payment. And what happens starting in 2022, these two things that were going in opposite directions, housing prices going up, but mortgage rates going down, mortgage rates turned around. They started coming up. And all of a sudden, you got the double whammy of houses in pricing were becoming more expensive, and the mortgage rate was becoming more expensive. And all of a sudden, you go from the median mortgage payment of around $1,000 in 1 year, pretty much doubles to $2,000, and then increases another 25% to $2,500. So you're going from $1,000 to $2,500, the median mortgage payment over the course of 2 years.
What 2 years were those?
That is from 2021 to 2023. So it's right there flanking. Of course, what happened? We got the inflation in 2022. The Fed tries to fight it, and the way it fights it is by raising interest rates. Well, right. There goes your mortgage rate.
There's your mortgage. That's right. And when mortgages go up, there's a ripple effect into the rental market, because owners of rental properties have mortgages, which means rents have to go up too. Right. And here's the thing. I see young people complaining about this all the time, and I just want to slap every last one of them. They say, well, I couldn't get approved for a $2,000 a month mortgage, so now I have to pay $2,300 a month rent. And they think that that's an injustice. What they don't bother to think about are all the expenses that come with homeownership.
Well, it's not just that, it's the risk. With a landlord, if I rent a room to somebody at $2,300 and they don't pay, I can kick them out. Depending on what state I'm in, that might take a month, it might take 6 months, but I can kick them out. With a mortgage, you're giving the kid $430,000, and if he stops paying on it, now what do you do? I mean, you can eventually repossess the house, but that is so expensive for the bank. There's a much greater risk with the mortgage than there is with the rent.
It is. My point is a simple one. If you can afford $2,300 in rent, that doesn't necessarily mean you can afford a $2,000 mortgage.
Exactly. Yes. Because the rent is a month thing. The mortgage, you're signing up to 30 years.
I have told this story before, and I bought this house in Arizona, and within 8 months, both air conditioning units went.
Yep.
And yes, I could afford the mortgage. It took me some doing to afford what did it come out to be? $34,000 to replace both HVAC systems.
Call the landlord, James.
Yeah, I did. And I answered the phone, and then I had to go get a second job to afford the HVAC units. So, there are all these things right below the surface, which people just brush away, that you have to keep thinking about. Right? It's a lot deeper than just the surface level.
Yeah.
So, that's housing. And I think, look, housing is more expensive now. Let's just admit it. You and I say all the time that, yes, it's more expensive, and houses are way better than they've ever been. But I don't know that you could legally build a 1950s style house anymore, given modern codes.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So we've painted ourselves into a bit of a corner legally.
Well, we made them much higher quality, in all sorts of ways, bigger, better, all of this. And of course, that's going to mean that $100,000 house today is not nearly the same thing as a $100,000 house in 1950, even adjusting for inflation. But there's something else that's interesting going on here that people miss. They talk about, I'm going to focus on the mortgage payments. They'll say things like, well, when I pay rent, I'm just flushing that money down the drain, but the mortgage payment is somehow better. And it is better because when you pay a mortgage payment, you're actually purchasing two things. One is the house as a place to live. The other is really savings. It's the equity that you're putting into the house. And you're going to get that
asset.
Yeah, you're going to get that back when you sell the thing. And we all understand that because, well, the house is going to appreciate in value. Yes. But what you're doing is you're counting the entire mortgage payment and saying, look at how expensive housing has become. But part of what you're counting shouldn't be counted at all because it's not the cost of the house as a place to live. It's the investment in it that you're going to get back later.
Yeah.
So basically, you're counting that plus savings.
I think people generally get that. But what they don't get is why they can't afford a house right now.
Well, I suspect they can't afford a house right now because that second part of the house, the house as an investment as opposed to house as a place to live, that's the piece that has gotten so expensive. And I offer you the following evidence. Economists calculate this metric called OER, owner equivalent rent. Owner equivalent rent is it's like the CPI, a price index. It's an index of the cost of your home, not the investment part, but the living in it part. So strip away all of the things that are different about your house versus an apartment, and tell me what's left in terms of cost. That's owner equivalent rent. Or if you want to think about it easily, think of it this way. If you were to not live in your house but rent it out to somebody, what would you rent it for? That's the owner.
It sounds like you're saying it's house minus apartment.
Yeah. But if you look at this, the owner equivalent rent, so the portion of your housing cost that is due to you living in the house as opposed to the house as an investment, that has gone up in the past 5 years. It's gone up 23% versus the median household income has gone up 23%. It's not the cost of the house as a domicile, it's the cost of the house as an investment that's gone up. Now, that doesn't make it feel any better when you have to write the rent check. What it does mean is that extra piece of pain in writing the rent check, that is going to come back to you when you sell the house in the form of greater value.
In the mysterious future. But that doesn't take the sting out when people cannot afford a house right now.
No, it doesn't. But it should give people pause. And the way I think you should think about it is this. Imagine your mortgage payment is $2,500 to take a big amount. And you say, well, I could rent, I can't afford a house. I rent an apartment for $1,500. So it's $1,000 less. Okay, rent that apartment for $1,500 and put $1,000 a month into your savings. And you say, well, I can't afford to do that. I said, but that's exactly what you were doing when you looked at buying the house for the $2,500 mortgage. James and I are delighted to be working with Civil. For years, we have been pushing people to think about how we can make the world a better place. Civil's mission of upgrading society fits exactly with what James and I have been talking about for years. Civil helps us by allowing us to do what we do best, which is researching topics that are important and communicating these to our listeners in ways we hope they find enjoyable. To see Civil's extensive list of content, including our podcast, Words and Numbers, and our new lecture series, Words and Numbers Live, visit civil.com. That's CIVL.com.
We're still not answering the question, why can't people afford these things? You keep telling me why everything is the same. Why then can people not afford it? I think I have the beginnings of an answer, but I want to hear yours first.
Well, they can't afford it because two reasons. One, the price of housing has been going up. It has been going up for 30, 40 years. That's not news. The news is the mortgage rate. The mortgage rate turned around from, 3 years ago was around 2%. It's now like 6 to 7%.
Yeah, but
it doesn't sound like much, but that dramatically balloons your payments.
It does, but I bought houses at 5 and 6%.
I have too, but
I bought
much smaller.
I bought $200,000 houses at 5 and 6%. And a $200,000 house now might get you killed.
Yeah, right.
Right. So there's a problem here. There's no such thing as affordable, good housing. Is there affordable housing? You bet. Is there good housing? Absolutely. They are not the same group. There is no overlap in that Venn diagram. And what you're left with here is if good housing is too expensive, it is being undersupplied.
Mm-hmm.
It's not being built. And if there's a big, giant group of people who want it, it would be being built. Now, you can't build it in Manhattan, right? And you can't build it in San Diego. So people have to check their expectations. But when I was 18, I couldn't afford to move to New York City.
Oh my God, no.
Even
I don't know I could afford it now.
No, I couldn't afford it now either. So I think we're dealing with unrealistic expectations to some degree, right? People want what they want and they don't give a shit about the reality of real estate. I mean, look, I moved to Utah, as you well know, not too terribly long ago, and I was able to get a 2-bedroom apartment there for $425 a month.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the expectations for a minute, because it sounds like someone listening to this is going to say, well, you're blaming young people and saying it's all their fault. It's in their heads and their expectations and all of that. And I want to back off of that a little bit. I think young people have been subjected to something that we were not subjected to. And interestingly, this decline in consumer sentiment roughly coincides with the proliferation, I'm going to go back and change that word, but I'll say proliferation of cell phones, smartphones in particular. We crossed the 50% barrier, 50% of Americans owning smartphones specifically, not cell phones, but smartphones. We crossed that roughly within a few years of this massive decline in consumer sentiment. I submit what's happening is people, particularly younger people, are quite understandably spending a lot of time on their phones, and advertisers have gotten really, really good. Not just advertisers, but any YouTube blogger has gotten really good at presenting perfect lives. And so you see these people with the perfect skin and the perfect car and the perfect boyfriend or whatever it is. And they're not movie stars. They're regular people who have crafted their lives to present themselves in this way, and you think by comparison, there's something wrong with you. Why isn't your life like that? You try to reach for it and you realize I can't afford that. Of course you can't afford it. It's not real, but you don't realize it's not real.
I want to get to that sort of thing in a future episode. And what triggered me on that was watching young women explaining their requirements for a husband. And it was 6'2", chiseled good looks, making over $200,000 a year. You've just described like 0.2% of the male population.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to get to that some other time, but I had this realization today, right? Because if people are worried about not being able to afford, say, a house, and I think home ownership is a great proxy, or the idea that you could go out and buy a house is a great proxy for the relative health of an economy, right? It just is. When a bunch of people say, well, I'll buy a house, you've got an economy that's running pretty well. Okay.
Yep.
If they can't say that, that means one of two things or both things. It means they're not making enough or they're spending too much, or a combination of the two. And I started to think, well, there's nothing I can say about what they can make, right? That's a market force that's driven by the choices they have made over their entire lives thus far. Part of that, though, is the student loan debt that they carry. And I don't think we factor this in nearly enough to the sorts of equations we're now talking about. So I did a little bit of digging today. And as of 2025, the average monthly student payment in the U.S. is generally cited between $200 and $500 a month. And $300 to $340 is common for recent bachelors. 60% of borrowers pay $299 or less, while the average borrower takes 20 years to pay off student loans. But as usual, but wait, there's more. Because if you've gone out to get a graduate degree, which will increase your earnings potential, theoretically, your average payments are over $800 a month. And if your household consists of a married couple, each with a graduate degree, you're paying $1,600 a month on your student loans already for 20 years. Good Lord. Why can't you afford a house? There's your reason.
Let me add some color to that. How much do you think average tuition, private university, 4-year, average tuition has gone up, let's say, in the past 10 years? Got a guess?
Past 10, I know the answer is monumental.
It actually isn't.
Oh, no, come on.
15%. And that's
sure?
15% over the course of 10 years.
Huh. Well, I guess
Now-
we've hit a cap. We've found
Well,
how
here's-
much people can afford, and they can't afford any more than that.
Well, but and I'm not disputing what you said about student loans, but what I'm counting here is only tuition and fees. And I'm not counting the published tuition and fees. I'm counting the actual, what you actually pay
What's
after
actually
you
collected.
get the non-loan aid, right? That's gone up 15% in the past 10 years, 30% in the past 20 years. Quite reasonable. Actually,
Under inflation.
maybe less than inflation.
It's under inflation.
But here's the thing. I suggest that you're absolutely right about the student loan debt, but rather it's not the tuition. It's the room and the board.
Well,
That the colleges are...
whatever you spend the money on, that's what it is.
Yeah, and so I think what may be happening here is when people talk about the cost of the college, they're lumping in living expenses. Well, you're going to have the living expenses whether you go to college or not. In fact, if you go to college, they're going to be worse because the college is going to give you not only is it going to charge you out the butt for living there, but it's going to give you all kinds of extra perks and the gyms and all this kind of thing. I think that's what's going on here. People aren't counting the fact that for 4 years, they're living at a decent level without earning money.
Right, taking out loans to cover the difference.
Yeah.
This is a problem, right? And you and I have talked about student loan debt and how stupid it is often. And there are a few degrees where we would both easily say, no, that makes perfect sense. Go ahead and do it.
Mm.
But for the vast majority of people, going into debt for college is the dumbest thing you can possibly do.
Mm.
If you can't afford the college you want to go to, you should find another college that you can afford. It's like any other product. I'd love to be driving a Ferrari. I can't afford a Ferrari. I have a Subaru. And if you're thinking, my dream school is, pick one out of the hat, Berry College, a place that I happen to love, in Georgia, and they want to charge you $65,000, but you should probably go to your state school and pay $8,000.
And live at home and pay even less.
But here's where I think the current generations, the younger generations, there's a bit of a disconnect. They have decided that their dream life is the life they're entitled to, not that life is hard and trade-offs have to be made.
I'm going to have to go back and in defense of young people. I don't think that they're thinking this, if indeed they are, out of any stupidity or ego or anything like that. I think that what's happening is they basically had their brains captured by this perfect life on social media shows.
I'm not speaking to their motivation. I'm not speaking to the reason why. I'm just saying I think this is an issue.
I can give you a very good example of this. When we were first married, this would have been in the early 1990s, got an apartment, couldn't afford cable for television, and lived in a place that without cable, you didn't have television. So we didn't have television and missed out on all kinds of, do you remember the show Northern Exposure, which was really popular back then? That's the first major show that I have no idea what it's about. I didn't see, everybody's talking about it. We didn't have television. To the point that people started to get concerned, like when we had kids and we still didn't have television, people would say, aren't you afraid someone's going to call social services because like you're depriving your children? People actually said that with a straight face, right? But we didn't have television. And I've done research I've done experimentation in consumer behavior. I understand how this works. I understand consumer psychology. It's part of my specialty. And I know the effect that advertising has on people. Despite all of that, I was taken aback that after we got rid of the television, all of a sudden I found I didn't feel like I had to go out and get a new car. And I realized, oh my God, at a gut level, I understand how all this advertising works and how it's supposed to get into your head and all of that.
And it still works on you.
I had no idea how insidious it is.
Yeah,
now,
that's right.
Take that experience and put a couple of zeros on it, because now you've got 24/7. It's in your pocket. It's attracting your attention. I don't know how many hours people spend on smartphones now, but I know it's over 5 a day. And what is it doing to our minds? I suggest that it's causing us to expect that we should have a lifestyle that's here. We can't get there, and we're saying there's a problem. I can't afford this. And the problem is less on the afford side. I'm not saying that there's not a problem there, but I think it's less on the afford side than it is on the psychological side.
Yeah. I mean, I remember when I was a college professor right around the turn of the century, we had to rent a house that left me with a decision to make in the kitchen. Did I want a refrigerator or a table? Because I couldn't have both.
Right.
Both would not fit. The house was so small that was my choice. And, of course, you go with the fridge because that's what you do. But I never once looked at that house and said, I'm a college professor. I deserve better than this.
Mm.
I thought, I'm young. It's early in my career. I'll do better. This is fine. It keeps the warmth in, right?
But along those lines, so when my first job was in West Virginia, and when I moved there from New York, and my first impression of the place was, oh my God, everybody here is poor. Which, clearly it was a poor area compared to where we came from. And yet, very quickly, that becomes normal. And so after a year there, I'm not looking at the places. I don't look at my neighbors and say they're poor. They're my neighbors. Not only that, but all of a sudden it didn't. You don't have the latest clothes. That doesn't matter. Nobody else does either. Your car's got rusted wheel wells. It does all right. Everybody else does too. And your whole expectation changes based on what you've surrounded yourself with.
Yeah. Well, look, if your theory is correct, and I suspect it's at least part of the issue, how big a part, I don't know, but if I were pressed, I would say probably significant. Then we are likely to be stuck in a world where consumer sentiment will always be lower relative to years gone past until we figure out a way to produce everything everybody wants for almost nothing.
Or until, and I think the younger generation is coming around to this, or until we take a step back and realize there's something, we're being sold a standard of living that is impractical is not the right word. We're being sold a standard of living that is perfection, and that's just not achievable.
I would use the word ridiculous.
Yeah,
unachievable would be a better word, probably. But
I asked my kids about this in preparation for this episode, and we're all on WhatsApp. So I put we're on the phone, right? I put a thing on WhatsApp. I said, "Look, we're going to talk about this stuff, and give me your opinion, just your gut reaction. What's going on here?" 6 kids, right? Immediately, my phone starts blowing up. They're mad that I asked the question, implying that I didn't understand what they're going through and all of this. And so, clearly there's a lot of emotion here. And so, we calmed down a bit. And my eldest son is the one who said he thinks that this is a psychological thing, that people are depressed. We look at the world and we see how horrible it is. To which I responded, yeah, there are horrible things in the world, but there are also really good things. And I think the good things outnumber by far the bad things, but you don't see them because that's not what sells. What sells is the bad news. And while you're watching the bad news, I'll tell you about this wonderful car that you absolutely should own because everybody owns it and it costs $500,000. And then you feel even worse.
Maybe. I don't know. The thought of a $500,000 car has literally never entered my mind. Literally never. Even if I had that kind of money to throw around, I wouldn't spend it on a car. That seems foolish enough to me. But I get it, right? I get why people think, look, I've done all the things I was told to do. I did all the right things. I played by the rules. And now, when it's time for me to win, I don't. I get that. And individuals are going to end up there even if they're statistical noise, right? There will be outliers, people who just get screwed at every turn in their lives. And there's no mathematical accounting for it, right? It's statistical noise. I happen to be one of them, but let's leave that for another day. The vast majority of people, if they do the right things, will experience good outcomes. So what do you tell them?
But they don't come immediately. They take time. And you can easily be led to believe that if they aren't occurring immediately, they're not going to occur. And I understand that. I felt the same way.
I think another thing that plays here is that people are living longer. They're staying single for much longer. And when you add those two things together, people say, well, my parents achieved this by the time they were 35. By the time your parents were 35, they had been married for 15 years.
Right, yeah.
Right? You're 35 and you're thinking about maybe finishing graduate school.
Mm.
And there's a real difference there in terms of time.
Let me give a prediction, which is going to be good news. This problem with housing prices really is a recent phenomenon. Well, I say recent. When you look at the massive increase in what it costs you on a monthly basis to pay your mortgage, that really jumped round about 2022. I think it's going to come back down for two reasons. One is we're just entering now a period of what economists are calling the great wealth transfer. As the boomers die, they leave their wealth to the younger generations. There's $70 trillion on the table.
Yep.
That's, if you do the math over the course of the period that economists think this will transfer, that's roughly $3 trillion a year that's going to get transferred to younger generations. So younger generations are going to benefit from that. Part of the transfer is going to be housing. They live in houses. So all of a sudden there's going to be an increase in the supply of housing, and there's not going to be a commensurate increase in the demand for housing because our population is topping out. So I think what my guess is, if we were to come back in 20 years and have this conversation again, people are going to be wringing their hands. What did we do about the falling prices of housing? That, I bought this house for $500,000 and now I can only sell it for $300,000 because the price of housing has fallen because there's so many houses and not as many people.
And I'll tell you what else we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about how white generational wealth was one number and black generational wealth was a fraction of that number. And that's going to cause racial inequality for decades to come. And people will point to it and draw all the wrong conclusions.
Yep.
But you can bet that that's what's going to happen.
Yep.
So in the large, I think you're right. I think there's mostly good news on the horizon because housing can only cost in the end what people can afford.
Yep.
That's how markets work. When people can no longer afford housing, downward pressure is applied to the cost of housing. And markets speak very loudly. The problem is that they don't speak immediately.
Before we end this, I do want to point out one thing I looked at a whole bunch of things: cost of rent, cost of housing, cost of gas, adjusted houses for square footage, tuition, on and on and on. Looked at a whole bunch of things, comparing what's happened today versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, on and on. One thing stood out, kind of almost head and shoulders above everything else, as becoming more expensive faster. Federal government. I'm looking at total federal tax revenues, so all taxes combined, federal government, on a per person basis. The cost of that has risen markedly faster than almost the cost of everything else.
But who would build the roads, Ant? Who would build the roads?
Well, but the roads have been built, right?
Yeah, that's always the tricky bit, isn't it? Look, I can tell you with 100% certainty that the cost of government will continue to rise until there is no more government.
Yeah, and when I'm looking at these numbers, I'm not looking at government spending, which is going up even faster. This is just what do we have to pay on a per person basis in the form of taxes?
Apparently, given that there's a massive shortfall every year, even though it's gone up year after year after year, we still aren't paying our fair share. Nobody is, because we're not covering the bill. Ah, well. On that happy note, I'll see you next time. And I will remind people, because they didn't get a reminder a couple of days ago, to be nice to each other. I know it's harder now that Christmas is past, right? Thanksgiving, easy to be nice. Christmas, easy to be nice. New Year's, easy to be nice. Oh, man, second week of January, what a pain in the ass that becomes. Now I got to deal with you people for the rest of the year. So now when it's a challenge, accept that challenge. Rise to it. Be nice to each other. See you next time, Ant.
See you next time, James. At Words and Numbers, we spend a lot of time talking about what's going on in the economy and the government. But fundamentally, all of this boils down to one thing. The greatest threat facing modern society is a lack of respect. That people who disagree somehow find it difficult, if not impossible, to discuss their differences in a civil manner. We at Civil are interested in upgrading civilization by encouraging people to engage with new ideas and ultimately engage civilly with each other. If you share our opinion, please join us by subscribing at civil.com. That's CIVL.com.